Here's Jordan Peterson to explain his weird ideas about God.
Do you think you've made headway on this? When you've talked, I watched just about a week ago with your chat with Steven Pinker and Jonathan Haidt, two guys who I hold in the highest intellectual regard. I've had them on the show. I like them both very much. They come from the more atheist perspective on this. We've talked about this a million times.
Yeah, so they think.
Right.
Peterson seems to think that you can believe in God without believing that you believe in God. He once said about some other atheist intellectual that he says he's an atheist, but he's not an atheist in his actions, because he doesn't regularly break the law. He has an idiosyncratic definition of belief that extends to actions, and an idiosyncratic definition of God that seems to extend it to include any moral intuitions with which he agrees.
Right. Okay, so that's it.
That's
what your argument is.
I'm going to Cambridge and Oxford to talk about this, in detail, what I just laid out. It's because what I want to do is, especially when I go to the UK, in these conversations, is I want to lay out a technical argument for sacred depth. So imagine this. We have a intuition that there's depth in literature. Because we think, well, that's a shallow story, and that's a deep story, and we think, well, that was really compelling and gripping. It hit me at a profound level, right? Versus, well, that was just light entertainment, right? We all have those intuitions. So what is this depth? And how far down does it go? Well, it goes down to the bottom of things. What's at the bottom? Well, what's at the bottom is by definition religious.
Peterson also seems to have a broad definition of religion. It seems to allow religion to be entirely naturalist and physicalist if it's just about a person's most foundational values. His definition is a lot like the psychologist William James's definition, which says that religion is one's relationship to the divine, and he defined the divine as that which a person takes most seriously. By such definitions, one can easily have a religion without God at all, at least by the definition of God most apologists and theologians seem to favor.
And why would I say that? Well, it's because when things move you at that level, that's how you experience it. It's not thought. It's way deeper. So it's like I go out of my dock at night up north where I am now, and it's dark, and the expanse of the heavens is laid out above me. And I look up. Well, I'm not thinking religious thoughts. I'm confronting the infinite itself, and that moves you inside. And I would say it even moves you to imitation, because you know what it means to have your head in the stars, right? I mean, it means to be oriented up in the highest possible manner.
It does? I thought that expression meant that you were daydreaming.
And so we're so compelled to imitate, again, at an instinctual level, that we can even imitate the infinite that we see spread above us in the night sky. And that's a religious calling.
What? How do we imitate the infinite? What does that even mean?
And all this talk about whether you believe in God, and it's all propositionalized. It's like, well, it misses the point. That's why I don't ever answer when people say, do you believe in God? I say, what do you mean by believe? And they think, well, you know what I mean. It's like, no, you don't know what you mean.
He has a point that a lot of people don't know what they mean when they talk about belief in God, in that the concept of God in which they say they believe is often difficult, if not impossible, to conceive. So when a lot of people say they believe in God, they don't really believe in God directly. Rather, they believe that the statement God exists has some kind of meaning, but they don't know what that meaning is, and they believe that whatever meaning it has is true. As William James once said, we have the strange phenomenon, as Kant assures us, of a mind believing with all its strength in the real presence of a set of things of no one of which it can form any notion whatsoever. I suspect, though, that this is not what Jordan has in mind, at least not entirely. The reason he doesn't think people know what they mean when they talk about belief in God is because he has these weird definitions of belief and God that most people don't share.
You have a bunch of assumptions that you don't even recognize, that you're peppering the question with to force me into a box to deliver the kind of answer that your question demands, given the way you phrased it. It's like, no.
It sounds to me like Peterson doesn't really believe in God in the way someone like William Lane Craig would define it, but doesn't want religious folks to make the assumptions about him that they make about all atheists. I think he is especially averse to giving the impression that he doesn't believe in some cosmic, objective system of ethics.
You say you don't believe in God. It's like, well, God is ineffable. What do you mean you don't believe in God? Well, what do you believe in then? Nothing?
Well, what do people who do believe in God believe in? I think a lot of folks have what Daniel Dennett called belief in God. They believe that believing in God is a good thing to do. What is God? Well, Dennett also explains that a lot of religious people act as though such questions are to be worked out by the priests and the popes and the theologians. They defer what Dennett calls doxastic labor to the experts. Dennett imagines them as saying, we lay people do the believing, we sign on to the doxology, and defer the understanding of those dogmas to the experts.
Well, no. Everything? Well, no, that doesn't work because then you're chaotic. Well, what's your highest value? Diversity? Equity? Inclusivity? Well, I don't need a highest value. Well, yes, you do, because otherwise nothing orients you through the landscape of choices.
What does your highest value have to do with God? You can have a highest value without believing in God. Does Peterson just define God as one's highest value? If that's the case, then what does it mean to say that God created the universe? How does value create a universe?
This isn't optional.
So to give the devil his due, then when you've had the conversations with a lot of these guys, you just talked to Sam Harris again, also, all of these guys.
That went great, by the way.
At the end, people that are not necessarily believers, your basic argument, I'm doing a little 101 here, is that you're a believer whether you believe it or not.
How exactly can you be a believer whether you believe it or not? I think there's a meaningful distinction, which Peterson and Rubin seem not to recognize, between having values and believing that some supernatural being created the universe.
That you're being...
Well, Harris...
Yeah.
Okay, let's take Harris as a good example. Harris does not believe in God, but he believes in the devil. So he's halfway there.
He obviously doesn't believe in a literal devil. I suspect Peterson is referring to the fact that Harris believes in objective morality, and he believes in objective evil, which Peterson defines as being the devil. If that's what he believes, then why can't he just as accurately say that Harris believes in a metaphorical God that represents objective good?
And why do I say
I think he believes
in the devil?
Trump is the devil. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a mistake. He also believes religion is the devil, and that's also a mistake. So what do I mean when I say that he believes in the devil? Well, all I did the last time I talked to Sam was ask him questions. That was that's something I highly recommend as a strategy. Like, just find out from the person you're talking to what they think, and don't try to win. Try to learn. Well, so Sam is really motivated by the same thing that motivated me like 30 years ago. He looked at the panoply of human atrocity. It terrified him right to the core. It's like, well, anything but this. And he wants something like an objective standard of values. Now, he thinks it can be found in science. I think that's technically wrong, but it's an argument worth having, and we don't know how to sort out the relationship between science and values.
I disagree with both the religious and Harris because I don't see how objective values can be discerned from either. Harris rejects the idea that you can't get an ought from an is, that you can't discern how things ought to be from the way things are. I don't see how this idea can be surmounted. I don't see how science can surmount it, nor do I see how theism can surmount it. Because even if there is a God who dictates morality, I still don't see how it is objectively the case that we therefore ought to follow the moral system which he dictates.
But the thing is that Sam certainly believes in evil. Okay, well, if you believe in evil, you also believe in good, because good is the opposite of evil, whatever that is.
I don't think Harris would dispute that he believes in good. What he would dispute is the idea that objective good is God.
And, well, what's God? What's God? Well, God is what's good.
Then what do theists mean when they say that God created the universe? How does good create the universe?
Well, okay, what does that mean? Is he a spirit? Like, is he a spirit in the sky? Well, what do you mean by spirit?
Why would good mean a spirit? And it seems clear to me that apologists don't have a discernibly coherent definition of spirit.
So here's something to think about. This is what I think. When I look back at the good men that I've been fortunate enough to know in my life, there's a spirit that shines through each of them that makes them good. That's how I can tell that each of them is good. Well, the essence of that good, that's no different than God. It might even be God.
So the essence of good men is what created the universe?
Now, you say, well, what does that mean, that spirit? Well, it's whatever is common among good men, let's say. Was that real? Well, isn't what's common among things more real than what's different?
What? How can something be more real than something else? And what's common among good people, or what motivates them to do good things, whatever you even take that to mean, is their social conditioning and their neurological capacity to receive and internalize that conditioning. Are those things God? Are they what created the universe?
And why a spirit? Well, it animates them. Like it's an animating force.
So are the electromagnetic action potentials in my axons. Are action potentials the same as spirits?
It's not a disembodied abstraction, which is the problem with like conceptions of God like Einstein's conception. It's so disembodied, it has no connection to the world. And that causes the death of God, that abstraction. Mircea Eliade documented deaths of God in many cultures across history. It's not only something that happened in the West that Nietzsche announced. And it happens when the idea of God gets so abstracted that it no longer has any connection with the world.
Peterson has a good point here, in the sense that the early biblical conception of God as a physical guy who could walk around in the Garden of Eden was more coherent than the much more abstract, timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind that theologians and apologists speak of today. Peterson seems to be arguing for a physicalist conception of God, but what he's describing is not anything that can sensibly be said to have created the universe. Peterson's idea of God does not seem to resemble the idea of God that most religious authorities say they worship. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.